Hi everyone. Today I want to talk about my favorite setting, my favorite game. This is Sens Neant. It's a French indie game, but I found out recently that it could very easily be a setting for D&D 5th edition. You would only have to modify a couple of rules, and it's a very interesting setting. Practically any backstory that you can think of for your characters is possible in this setting, and there's a lot of particularities that make the experience of playing this game very poetic and very interesting. And as a game master, I haven't ever seen anything like this. I'm doing this video to explain everything that you need to know to GM or play inside of this setting. Of course, if this video is interesting to a lot of people, I might make a second one that will have spoilers for the story and detail more of the characters that are, well, spoilery. The first thing to know about the setting is that everything in Myriad is sentient. Everything. So gusts of winds are going to be sentient. Rocks are going to be sentient. Even rays of light or shadows are going to be sentient. Everything in this universe has a soul, and everything has a limited amount of telepathy that they can use to communicate with one another. So that makes spells like talk to animals or talk to plants, or even having languages kind of redundant in this setting. So if you want, your character can have a discussion with their weapons, their equipment, or just a grain of sand on the beach. And there's personality traits that are associated with whatever you're talking to based on what elements they're composed of. But it makes for a very interesting experience. This setting is set on ancient Mars. That's why I've been using a map of Mars when there was water. Basically, it's a story about aliens who inhabited this world and thrived in it until the civilization collapsed completely and became the lifeless Mars that we know today. And those aliens are particular, and they make us see the world really differently when we play as them, because they have very different senses from our own. They don't have any noses or mouths, so they don't have the sense of taste, and they don't have the sense of smell. But they have two other senses that are very new and very strange. So the first is the alvea. It's a second pair of eyes that all of the Myriadians get. This allows them to vividly hallucinate anytime that they watch a shadow. So if they're in the dark, they're able to hallucinate everything around them, and basically that's how they dream, that's how they rest. Usually the player who's in charge of the character will have to describe a little bit what the character is dreaming of in order to recover from fatigue and recover their HP and stuff like this. It can be things that the character is obsessed about, or it can be mystical visions of a potential future. For example, this is what, things would look like to us humans, and this is what it would look like for a character of Myriad. There's no shadows anywhere, there's always something there. And it's very hard for them to tell what is reality and what is fiction, because that sense is extremely confusing. It's very overpowering. And so a lot of the times, the things that they will see in the shadows will be just as real to them as what all of their other senses are telling them. The other sense that the creatures of this setting have is the lias. It's this sense of telepathy that works in a very, very interesting way. Basically, it allows all of the creatures to communicate their emotions directly to one another. And that's also the basis for combat. In this setting, the creatures express their emotions as elemental vibrations. So every fight is kind of like an argument where the characters are, every time you make an attack, you're expressing an argument and trying to convince the other character. For example, if you're expressing a sentiment of like utter rage and your argument is just to scream in an intimidating way at the other party, well, then you're just going to, use elements of fire that are what resonate with the emotion of rage. And so that would be the equivalent of, casting a fireball or attacking with a flame weapon or something. And so you get a lot of fights that could be described like the fights in Avatar: The Last Airbender, where people are throwing elements at each other, and at the same time, there's a talk where the enemy is trying to convince you and you're trying to convince the enemy to either step down or change their point of view, things like this. Now, depending on what element composes a creature, they will only be able to have certain vibrations. So, for example, a rock will only be able to have emotions related to the element of earth, and they won't be able to express anything else until they're changed into something different. A rock can be stubborn, it can be enduring, it can be completely still and express those emotions, but it can't have rage like we express. That's a feeling of fire. And that colors a lot of how the roleplay is going to happen, because a lot of the creatures you interact with are restricted in the type of ideas that they can have, the type of thoughts and emotions that they can express. And you can change them and offer a new perspective to them if you want. Now, you would think that would restrict the roleplay for player characters, but the player characters all play a particular species in this setting called the Cetantras, who have access to all 6 of the elements. It's fire, water, air, earth, light, and darkness. And so they're able to express any emotions that we humans think of. This means your player characters will be able to have any sort of personality that the player wants to have. And the Cetantras are the only species that has all 6 of the elements. Everything else, every other object, is kind of missing at least one of the 6 elements and cannot express themselves fully, or even experience the world under all emotions. Another particularity of this setting is unusual deaths. So if you get beaten in combat, instead of having to make death save rolls, you're in a state where you're emotionally drained. You're not able to express anything in that state, and anything that anyone says to you, any order that's given to you, becomes an imperative. It overpowers your own emotions, and you can be made to do anything except fighting, because you don't have enough strength to do that anymore, until you're able to recover a little bit of your energy, either because somebody gives it to you, like a healing potion or something, or until you spend enough time in the dark that you're able to recover. In this state, you can be shattered. This is the equivalent of death for the creatures of Myriad. When you're shattered, you cease to exist, but all of the material and all of the emotions that were you become split into different entities. Basically, as you die, your body just becomes different things. So you could become like a chair, 5 stones, a dragon, and a tree, That's kind of up to the game master, and usually that gives for like very creative and very interesting results as the deaths of the characters. Usually those splits will happen along elemental lines, so if a Cetantra dies, it's very unlikely that whatever breaks off will have all 6 elements and be another Cetantra. More often than not, it will become smaller creatures with less elements available to them. Another interesting thing is unusual births for the species of the Cetantras. Everyone else can be modified by a little bit of magic or alchemy, You can create mud out of dirt if you teach the dirt to have access to emotions of water. So basically there's a bit of alchemy that, is inherent to the setting. But the Cetantras specifically, they can only be born a single way. You need to have 2 Cetantras that have a very strong bond with one another. In terms of the original game, the bond needs to be at a level of 10. And so that can be a great love, a great friendship, a great rivalry, any sort of very deep emotional relationship. And when they reach the apex of that relationship, usually they'll be together at that point, and they're able to perform a ritual, very simple, instantaneous, that will randomly change a creature that is present near them into another Cetantra. So, for example, there could be a fire nearby that just becomes a Cetantra that gains access to all of the emotions. And so before your player characters were Cetantras, they would have been something else. Cetantras are more fully mature because they had a previous existence, and it's kind of like reaching maturity when you get all 6 elements. So I've got a player who used to be a library chair, for example, and that's the sort of crazy things you can do with this story. Real quick, we're gonna go over the history of Myriad. the important events that you need to be aware of in order to GM this. At the start, we have a golden age. In this period, there was a lot of harmony in the world. Never had been any wars, and the world was kind of ruled over by the 6 primordials. Those are going to be incarnations of each element who give their names to those elements. So you have the primordial fire, you have the primordial water, things like that. Setantras don't exist yet, and actually the appearance of Setantras, who were called parasites back then, is the beginning of the new era. Because the Setantras have access to all 6 elements, they're able to feed off of the elements of every other creatures. So they are seen as kind of an apex predator type, and the rest of the world, when they see those creatures starting to appear, they kind of freak out and, collect them in a single place and just don't want to have anything to do with them. They're kind of shunned from the rest of the world, and when every object, every gust of wind just hates you in general, it's kind of hard to exist. So that was a pretty bad time for them. At some point, one of the Setantras is born with something that's never been seen before. This Setantra was called Setantra. The species is named after him. And basically he's born without his sense of sight, without his sense of hearing, without his sense of Alvea, no sense of touch. All he has is the sense of telepathy. The parasites see him as inferior and cast him out of the small crater where they all live. That crater is the only creature that accepts them and that will house them. And so he's shunned out into the world. He disappears for a while, and when he comes back to his people, strong from the experiences he's had all over the world, he has reached something called the ultimate sentiment. He's become a living god. Like, he's able to convince anyone of anything if he wants to. Of course, because you can only express true emotions with that sense of telepathy, he wouldn't have been able to convince anyone of a lie, because lying didn't exist back then. And so this brings about this golden age where every creature on Myriad sees Setantra or hears about Setantra and realizes, oh my gosh, this is something that is accessible to us. Other of us could become gods, and since only one creature that was a Setantra has been able to reach it, it means probably that the Setantras are the closest to divinity as there is in terms of all of the creatures that are present. And there's a shift in perspective where the parasites become desirable. More and more creatures want to become Setantras, and more and more Setantras want to achieve godhood, but nobody manages it, and nobody's managed it since. This period of history comes to an end when Setantra is assassinated by a creature called Acid. This creature has some strange powers and introduces a new element into the setting, the element of acid. This element allows characters to lie. If you have acid inside of you, you're able to lie about some subjects. You're able to become anonymous and things like this. And so this assassin, also called the Liar, kills Setantra, murders him in cold blood, and then just disappears. And nobody can figure out who he was because he was anonymous thanks to the powers of acid. And so it becomes this strange mystery of who the fuck killed a god, and why would they do something like this? Why would they stop us from all reaching godhood and stuff like this? So there's an immense period of chaos that follows this. All of the primordials see what's happening and are disgusted with a society that would let Setantra die, and so they just vanish. They disappear from the world. And there's legends that they go to the blue planet, which from Mars would be Earth. They're just gone. So there's practically no leadership. People don't know how to reach the ultimate sentiment, but a lot of characters have ideas. So there's a schism that happens, and the world splits into 6 countries, 6 schools of thoughts, based on each element, where each school has a different idea of how the ultimate sentiment could be reached. The School of Fire, for example, they know that Sitantra could defeat anyone in battle in conversation, so they think by being the strongest warriors, they'll be able to achieve godhood. On the other hand, there's the School of Water. They're more about making peace with everyone so that you can have good relationships with everyone, because Siddhartha described the ultimate sentiment as loving everything in the world. This creates a lot of conflict, and there's two wars that happen as a result. The War of Fire and Water first. That is a major conflict in the history of this setting. Basically, the war starts and nobody really knows who caused it, but it is so devastating that the leaders of the world call for a meeting, a judgment, and try to figure out who started this, who caused all of this. And that's where the School of Water gets their reputation for being awesome judges and completely impartial, because they assign their judges that rule that the School of Water is responsible for this. They realize that there's a schism inside of the School of Water, and that a sect that worships the new element of ice is trying to undo all of the work that people have put into getting the ultimate sentiment. And so this war ends in a civil war between water and ice, and something terrible happens. Thanks to acid, one of the properties of acid is, the ability to do a duel of tears. And this is horrible because it's the only thing that results in a death where you don't leave anything behind. Everything that was you, all of the emotions that you had are just gone, evaporated. There's nothing left of you. And that's seen as a tragic loss, because that's the only way that the world just loses elements, loses material. It's seen as such a tragedy that culturally it's remembered as, something as big as dropping nuclear bombs on Japan. Technically, everyone who has access to acid could do a duel of tears, but yeah, they don't. And so the leaders of the two sides have this duel of tears, and only one of them survives. The other one is completely obliterated, and yeah, that brings the fighting to a close. The next war is the War of Fire and Darkness. Basically, it ends with someone from the School of Darkness betraying the School of Darkness and allowing the School of Fire to have total victory. It completely wipes out all of the hierarchy, everybody who's at the top of the School of Darkness, and it allows this one betrayer called Indales to take over completely the school, and he's been ruling it ever since. The last period of time is the modern period. Something unpredictable happens. It's been thousands and thousands of years since Siddhartha dies. People are starting to lose hope that the ultimate sentiment will ever be reached, and then something strange happens. A minor character from history that most people didn't even know about appears out of nowhere. They're called Azilis, and they are the child of Siddhartha. They've been dormant for a really long time. Nobody knows where they really were. They seem to have a lot of memory gaps, but anyone who's able to, communicate with their memories is able to see that, yeah, this person is super old and definitely had a strong relationship with Siddhartha. And so this person, as it is seen as the new hope. They're going to be able to reach the ultimate sentiment and then guide everyone to the ultimate sentiment. So this person is brought to Malgosh, the crater in which the Sitantras used to live, and it becomes kind of their seat of power. And that brings about a little bit of era of peace between the schools that stop their conflicts in order to see what's going to happen. What is this going to work? The player characters are basically Sitantras, taken from each of the schools and sent to help Azilis in any way that they can. They're basically like bodyguards, but also adventurers that are in the service of Azilis. And yeah, you get to experience the world as from this privileged position of you're serving the hope for the new world. Now I'm going to talk a little bit about the different schools and the type of territory that they have, their capitals, emotions related to to the element of that school and the special powers that these schools have. First off, we have the School of Light. Its territories are this vast desertic expanse that is constantly being bombarded by sunlight. In this desert, there's practically nothing that offers any sort of shadow, so creatures that are more attuned to the shadow flee this place. The capital is at the center of this desert. It's called Mir. It's this large city that has mirrors everywhere that reflect the sun and the sunlight and just create this area of like more intense light. It's also a place where Stantras have developed other means of creating light. So they have actually like they have night lights that stay on at all times. And the way that they're able to survive without there being any shadow in this area is that they receive nourishment from the light instead of from the darkness. So you know how their Sitantras are able to feed off of anything. That's the other thing that you can recover HP with, is to basically have something else give it to you. And so that they're able to take nourishment from the light that just volunteers its energy to keep the city running. It's got forgers and it's got this huge library, the Library of Light, that has entities, books that have some of the oldest memories of the world stored in them. Unfortunately, because those books have very strong opinions, because they're very old and sometimes conservative, they get into fights a lot. So, you know, the library is dangerous to get into. The emotions tied with the School of Light are, they're the school of certainty. So the sentiment, the feelings related that you can express with the element of light are satisfaction, concentration, reconnaissance, curiosity, interest, love, pride, marvel, accomplishment, knowledge, belief, attention, rigor, perceptivity, unity, infinity, logic, disillusion, dogmatism, awakening, exaltation, ecstasy, fascination, worship, stability, beauty, assurance, resolution, security, accomplishment, certitude, and hope. They have a couple of special powers. They're able to do an instant reading of your tier, which means that thanks to their lives, they're able to almost instantly tell which bonds you have with whom. Normally that takes a little bit of time, but in game terms, they're able to basically read your character sheet and tell who you have strong bonds with, who you have strong emotional feelings with, and what type of bonds those are. This allows them to be very perceptive and very analytical of other schools. Another strange power that they have is that they have basically this university where, you know, the reality of the world is debated, and science is done. But strangely enough, if you get enough arguments to prove something, even if it isn't true yet, and you convince the council enough that they put it as a fact in the library, then it slowly starts to become a fact for the rest of the world. That's how the book phrases it. It's a little bit unclear how this happens, but it's probably because that library has a lot of influence and just manages to convince everyone else about the truth of the world. So the School of Light believes they can reach the ultimate sentiment by understanding everything. Basically, when they've compiled enough data, they will know enough to understand, oh, so this is how you can reach the ultimate sentiment. The School of Darkness, on the other hand, is a school of horrors and terror and, the School of Undeath. They lost all of their territory that was on the surface during the War of Fire. So now all of their territory is underground, where the sunlight doesn't reach. They have vast expanses of underground networks, kind of like the Underdark, which are very dangerous. And because you can get lost in the illusions of darkness very easily, that's where basically all the criminals are sent. Everyone who is known to have acid inside of them, which is seen as treason, is sent there to just exist and try not to corrupt anybody else. Their capital is called Visage. It's basically one of those rare places where the darkness, in the darkness, everyone sees the same thing. And that same thing is the city of Visage. And so basically, everybody has dark vision inside of that city, despite it not having any sources of light. It's a strange place inhabited by creatures that don't look quite right. This school's most important artifact is this building called the Cathedral of Shadows, which allows for the process of resurrection. It's the only school that is able to perform resurrections. And it's kind of strange. The way that they do it is that they gather the memories that people have of a person, put all of those memories inside the Cathedral of Shadows, and then the cathedral just recreates them as they were remembered. It's seen as something that is tragic because, as the book describes, nobody really exists as you remember them, as other people see them. My parents think of me a certain way, but they're wrong about certain things about me. My wife thinks of me in a different way, which means that, if they combine their memories to bring me back, I would be a weird mix of all of those points of views. And a lot of people are very disappointed as when they bring back someone and they turn out to be different than they remembered, because, yeah, how could they be the same? Some of them even come back out with different names, which is like a completely failed process. So yeah, that's the special power of the School of Darkness. They're able to bring people back to life. And usually that's where characters will start. I like to start my characters off as you died being a protector previously for Aziz, and then you just are brought back to life in the cathedral. You're given your gear, and you might not have all of your memories quite clear, so that's a good moment to kind of like talk to the players about the setting, let them like get their feet on the ground, because that school is going to be understanding of people who are disoriented after being brought back to life. The emotions tied to darkness are weakening, affliction, anxiety, bitterness, confusion, guilt, feeling torn apart, deception, despair, destabilization, division, disgust, distress, astonishment, wandering, frustration, fragility, febrility, hesitation, worry, incomprehension, uncertainty, insatisfaction, instability, perplexed, fear, preoccupation, rupture, love, regret, surprise, skepticism, worry, solitude, terror, torment, worry, again, trouble, vulnerability. I'm translating those, so that's why some it's not always like super easy to translate. Anyways, the School of Darkness looks at Sitantra's legend and thinks he didn't have all of his senses, and that must be what made him special. So they have some volunteers that take off all of their senses apart from telepathy and try to survive. But if you don't have your Alvea, you're not able to rest in darkness, and so you start to die. So far, nobody's been able to like survive very long in the state where all of their senses were taken away from them because they just couldn't rest. So it's it's not been working just as much as it hasn't been working for the other schools. The School of Fire believes that they can reach the ultimate sentiment by being the best fighters. Sitantra was able to fight anyone and best them, so if you become the ultimate warrior, you should be able to become a god. You can think of their territory as, the elemental plane of fire. It's gonna be this wasteland where there's, rivers of lava, trees are burning constantly. The cities look like very large dark machines that are constantly pumping smoke into the atmosphere. Their capital is called Flame. It has great forges in which artifacts are constantly being made, and it has this huge arena where the fate of the school is decided. if you want to go up in the ranks of that school, you have to defeat in the arena somebody with a higher rank than you. There's a fighting season every year where one of the ambassadors from that school has to put their title on the line, and anybody can, fight them in order to try to get that title. The School of Fire does not have any special powers. By the way, you don't need to give any of the special powers that I'm describing to your players. It's just, lore related. The feelings of fire are determination, animosity, agitation, panic, joy, animation, heat, exuberance, euphoria, effervescence, galvanization, hardiness, hostility, hatred, drunkenness, joy, jubilation, jealousy, feeling nervous, panic, resentment, overworking, stimulation, passion, love, rage, anger, fury, wrath, feeling pressed for time, energy, excitement, and impatience. The School of Water has this wide territory. Basically, anywhere that there was ocean back then is under the dominion of the School of Water, which means that their forces are stretched very thin. But thanks to the ocean, that doesn't allow a lot of other emotions to pass through it. That weakens all of the fire attacks, basically, and stuff like this. They have an extremely strong defense. Nobody's ever been able to beat the School of Water apart from the School of Water itself. They have a strange court system where all of the people higher up in the hierarchy inherit their positions from their parents. They believe that by making peace with everyone and that some of them will be able to reach this universal love that Sitandra described as being the ultimate sentiment. They don't have any particular special powers. Their capital is an underwater capital, and their ultimate artifact is called the Green Flame, and it's a bunch of algae that are just like swimming around, creating this look of a gigantic green flame underwater. The emotions tied to water are softness, peace, apathy, sadness, astonishment, calm, charm, compassion, love, understanding, conciliation, contentment, relaxation, tenderness, fulfillment, deliverance, doting on someone, sloth, serenity, empathy, felicity, prudence, awareness, temperance, quiet, relaxation, sensibility, tranquility, and wisdom. The School of Air doesn't have a lot of territory as far as land goes, but they have floating islands, and the sky is basically their domain. The one piece of land that they do have is called Breath, and it's this gigantic capital that, with this strange architecture, all of the stone spires guide the winds in certain ways, and they look like giant flutes. And so the city sings with the movements of the air, and that song is supposed to deliver prophecies to the School of Air. That's one of their powers. Some of the enlightened characters from the School of Air are able to interpret the songs of the wind and be able to tell the future. So that's where the prophecies of this setting come from. They also have a special power that they're the only Sitantras that usually have wings, with the exceptions of those that are misremembered in the School of Darkness, who can just not look like they used to if they're remembered wrong by someone. The feelings of air are welcoming, inertia, helplessness, discomfort, indifference, negligence, invisibility, disdain, absence, unawareness, detachment, distance, distraction, retreat, suspension, ennui, boredom, discouragement, indecision, indetermination, liberty, secrecy, silence, feeling nonchalant, feeling reserved, tiredness, shyness, emptiness, distractions, entertainment, extinction, insensibility, love, abandon, and disenchantment. They believe that by understanding what the future holds and doing the right prophecies, they're going to be able to determine how the ultimate sentiment will be reached once again. So they're relying on their seers to tell them how to reach enlightenment. The School of Earth has control over this wide area of forests and land and mountains. A lot of the pockets of corruption of the worshippers of acid can be found inside of there, and so they're constantly fighting against the forces of acid, trying to keep them at bay and trying to keep them from spreading to the rest of the world. Their capital is a gigantic tree that is an amalgamation of trees, and it's also the artifact of that school. It basically houses the memories and the ghosts of all of the leaders of that school that are trapped inside it and that can be freed to fight for the school in its defense should the need arise. Mostly, they try to reach the ultimate sentiment by denying acid and fighting acid. The feelings of Earth are discipline, courage, confidence, comfort, determination, enthusiasm, enchantment, stubbornness, fortification, fidelity, love, truthfulness, honor, implication, inspiration, invulnerability, perseverance, presence, proximity, comfort, power, pragmatism, solidity, sympathy, seduction, tenacity. If you want to GM this game, you only need to modify just a few rules. First off, nobody gets dark vision. Everybody has to suffer from the darkness and from the vivid illusions that come from it. You also don't get a state between life and death. Instead, you have the state of exhaustion, where you can be asked to do anything until you recover any HP, apart from fighting, because you're in no state to fight. It's also in the state of exhaustion that you can be shattered and killed, but that never happens by accident. It has to be a willing murder. So there's no accidental deaths in this setting. Last of all, you need dim light in order to have short rests, and total darkness in order to have long rests, which means that most creatures either find a way to cover their eyes when they need to rest, that even the light of the stars doesn't stop them from recovering their HP, or they rest inside of those large bubbles called shadow chambers for Cetantras who don't have eyelids, so they can't close their eyes. Everything else, the magic of D&D, the races and things like this, you can just treat normally. I have my players playing as different races, and the stats impact, what they look like and stuff like this. For example, I've got a tiefling with wings, which means, the character has wings, just like if they were from the School of Air. Yeah, you can treat all artifacts as sentient, but keep the magics being the same way. And most of the monsters that exist in D&D can be made to fit in any of the territories of this setting. Now, I want to talk about specificity of how telepathy works in the setting. Each creature has this invisible aura, which is also an organ called the tear. It's where all of the memories and emotions of that creature are stored. If they only have access to some emotions, that's the only emotions that you will be able to find in there. As they, communicate with other creatures, they develop relationships with other creatures. They are going to form bonds. Those bonds are basically act kind of like layers of sand of different colors that are going to come to rest around this tier, making it grow over time. So you level up by having strong relationships with a lot of other creatures in the setting, which is why I would suggest using the milestone system to level up. As your tier grows stronger and bigger from the number of relationships that you have, your range of telepathy is supposed to get stronger. I've put it at 60 feet for most characters, but Cetantra was able to speak with anyone from any point of the world without using spells like sending. Azilis is able to reach about half of the planet with their telepathy. So those tiers are accessible spaces for other creatures. Thanks to the alliance, you're not only able to communicate emotions directly, but you're also able to enter physically the memories of other creatures. Usually you'll need to be invited, and it's kind of like the retelling of a scene, but that scene can affect the people who are inside of it. And so, for example, if you're arriving in the middle of a fight scene or a flood, you might yourself get swept away by it. And when characters are trying to hide stuff from others, they can rearrange their tiers and basically have the layer that they're trying to hide. For example, like a forbidden romance, if it's recently settled like dust on a sphere, you can rearrange it to have it be closer to the center of the tier and have other relationships being more outward. It's a way to hide things, but when somebody is from the school of light, where they're able to basically like tell what the names of all of your bonds. Those are the central ways of creating characters in the original rule set, where basically you're defined by the bonds that you have with other entities, but also with concepts. So you could be tied to, the spirit of fighting, even if that's not an entity. You can have a strong relationship with that concept. The core of the tier is always, and can't be rearranged, it's always your relationship with yourself. You're going to be tied to your lias, which is your name, and your telepathy. Those are indistinguishable. So everyone has a true name, and also everyone is, thanks to this, able to tell other people's names just by engaging in telepathy with them. You're able to sense the core of the individual, even if you aren't able to, visit the memories of that individual concerning themselves until you go like all the way inside the tier. Because the sense of the alliance is only able to communicate emotions that have happened, or truthful emotions that the person really feels inside, you're unable to lie in general. You're able to lie by omission, but you can't make false statements in the setting, with the exception of if you have a bond that is corrupted by acid. This happens if you're exposed to acid. You can choose to corrupt one of your bonds, and then you're able to lie on anything relating to that bond. So if you have a bond with the concept of courage and you taint it with acid, you'll be able to lie about, oh, this person was not courageous at all. I can tell, I've seen them flee. Or say, I'm super courageous, even if you're not. On the other hand, if it's a relationship with another entity, you'll be able to lie about that entity. Normally, the bonds between two creatures have to have the same intensity, a number between 1 and 10 that shows how dedicated and how important the relationship is to you. And it's also going to have an elemental type. So each bond is made out of one of the 6 elements, and it expresses the sort of emotions that kind of triggered this bond. Of course, if an entity has only access to, feelings of earth, you'll only be able to form a bond of earth with that entity. So you can also, change that entity to have more emotions, like I said, by introducing them to other feelings and by changing their form in order to create whatever relationship types you want to have with them. Inside of those bonds are all of the memories that you have relating to the character that you're bound to, or the concept that you're bound to. Of course, if one entity corrupts their bond and makes it into a bond of acid, the other will still have the bond of the same element that they started off as, and will not know that part of the bond is corrupted by acid. So they won't. So that's the one exception where you can have someone with, a bond of acid on one side and a bond with another element on the other side. In the original rule set, the characters are able to transfer bonds and memories with one another. If you're able to transfer all of the intensities of a bond to somebody else, you've essentially transferred your relationship with whatever you're bound to that entity. So for example, you know, say I'm bound to my computer. My relationship with my computer is that I use it every day. If I was a Sitantra, I could transfer this relationship to my wife, and then my wife would be able to remember, everything that I've ever done on the computer, and have that relationship and have the emotions connecting her to the computer, and the computer would cease to have its relationship with me, and instead would shift to whoever that bond got transferred to. So it is possible to use that mechanic in the original game to get other characters to transfer like a lot of bonds to you and to level up pretty quickly. You got to convince other characters to take a piece of themselves and just give it to you, kind of like, cutting a finger to add it to your friend's hand. So it doesn't happen very often. All right, last of all, I'm going to talk about the powers of acid. Acid is this new strange element. It's named after the entity who killed Sitantra. Like I said, it allows you to lie about stuff. It allows you to fake memories. If you have a bond of acid that characters are accessing, you're able to lie about what type of bond it is, lie about the intensity, and completely make up the memory of the scene that they arrive in. Basically, if somebody does a ritual to like enter your memories, you have complete control of the environment until they leave. It also allows for anonymity. Basically, any creature that has been touched by acid is able to make a mask of acid that will make them, that will mask their true name, that will make them look like their true name is acid, and they will take the shape of the assassin. And so what characters can do is that they can go to a shadowy place where everyone is distracted by the illusions of shadow. They can don the mask, emerge from that place of darkness as acid, do whatever crime they want in perfect anonymity, and if they can reach another place of acid, again, to take off the mask, they can get away scot-free with murder. Unfortunately, you have to corrupt one of your bonds with acid every time that you use the anonymity. The last power of acid is the Jewel of Tears, which, like I said, I don't really have any mechanics for it, but it was such a unique event where it's only supposed to have happened once in history. It actually happened to Sitantra. That's how he got obliterated. But it only happened between people are only aware of it happening between during the Civil War of the School of Water, and it was such a huge deal that nobody's really done it ever since. First of all, it outs you as having acid inside of your tear, which is a big taboo because it's supposed to hold you all back and hold everyone back from reaching the ultimate sentiment. But also, some of your bonds will be destroyed in the process. You basically pitch bonds from your character sheet against the bonds of the other person that you're fighting, and depending on the intensity and the elements, you one of those bonds is destroyed until there's until one of the characters stands victorious and the other has no bonds left. But the victor will very often have sacrificed a lot of their relationships and emotions. Of course, if you use the powers of acid too much, well, you end up being corrupted. You become an agent of acid who has no self-control, and whose every action is decided by the assassin. We know they still exist somewhere, and we know that that acid is probably not their true name, that they used a mask to hide the murder of Sitantra. That only happens if the bond that you corrupt is your core bond. And if that happens, you basically lose this relationship with yourself and give it to acid, which is able to then just control whatever you do. Which is why it's never a good idea to use acid. But yeah, if your players watch this video, they'll know not to do this. I hope I've made the setting as interesting for y'all as it is for me. It's got a lot of weird concepts, and it's this like amazing setting where, because any sort of creature can exist, like dragons and like trees, and everything is sentient, your backstory could be like, characters' backstories could be just so weird. They could have been an object, they could have been a dragon, and they could have been like so many things before they became a Citantra, and then you're sent to, you know, work for the Prince Azilis, and to try to get them to reach the ultimate sentiment. And you know, you're in this like fight with the element of corruption, the element of acid, and you're slowly realizing that, yeah, the way that it spread, kind of a lot of creatures got exposed to it, and so there's a lot of people who are hiding the fact that they have acid inside of them. It makes for like really awesome storytelling that is very poetic and very weird, because you have to describe things with senses that are not the senses we're used to as human beings, and so you have to kind of adapt the way that you're telling the story. You can't, you know, the sense of hearing for Citantras is more about aesthetics than, you know, warning you of danger like it is for us humans. Because they are able to sense each other with telepathy, they don't need to be like aware of sounds around them to be aware of attacks. Instead, it's much more about, you know, enjoying yourselves. So if you hear pleasant noises like music and stuff like this, you can enjoy it, or, you know, not enjoy it, just like you would with stuff that you're tasting. And so it becomes like, it goes from being one of the most important senses in the descriptions that we have to one of the least important, because the sense of telepathy, the lias, is just more commonly used, more useful to those creatures. Anyways, I hope I've interested you in the setting of Sens Void. If this video garners enough interest, I will describe the leaders of the schools and the ambassadors that they have to each of the schools, along with the core story that is told of this, the end of the world, where we transition from, you know, the society on the brink of something to just a wasteland that Mars is today. Hey y'all! Thanks for watching the whole video. Please like and share and subscribe so that I can keep making content like this. Also, please consider having a look at my other channel. I upload new games for my campaigns weekly, and I do regular Game Master tips and monthly tabletop role-playing games reviews on the other channel. Thank you all for your support, and have a great day!